Sheriff Knowles, what is your chief objection to this bill?
So my chief objection to this bill is the premise that for anyone in the state of Washington or in the United States would have to get a permit from their government to exercise a constitutionally protected right. Here in the state of Washington, the people who drafted the Washington State Constitution 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, had very strong language that supported gun rights and gun ownership, very much in line with the Constitution of the United States. And in the last probably 5 years, it has become fashionable with this legislature to erode away our ability to keep and possess firearms. And it's an affront to me. I think it is such an affront to what we as citizens enjoy as God-given rights through our Constitution. And the idea that they would, number one, require someone to be fingerprinted by the government, by the Washington State Patrol, to be sent into the FBI, to have a required safety course to put on and certified by the state, and to pay for that, and then to pay to have a license to carry out your constitutional rights is just ridiculous to me. And I think it shows that the legislature, at least, is fully intent on stripping away as many of our rights in this state as possible.
So you believe the government is overstepping?
Oh, I believe it is a clear overstep of government's authority. And I think it's going to be a very short trip to all of a sudden telling us for our freedom of speech, we have to go through government-sanctioned training on what is appropriate speech and what isn't. And then what's it going to stop this legislature from telling us, well, you have to get a license from the state before you speak out. I mean, these are fundamental rights we have that are given to us at birth, according to the Constitution, that this state is stripping away. The Constitution is meant to limit government, not authorize it to intrude into our lives.
Now, you made a very impassioned statement. We have let's say, when did you make that, and why was it important for you to speak with us today?
You know, there's a litany of anti-gun legislation that is proposed this session. And really, there's just a lot of really anti-public safety legislation that is proposed this year, and a lot of it making its way out of committee and getting into the House for floor votes and the Senate for floor votes that will absolutely erode public safety. And when I ran for office as sheriff, I knew that my voice was important to stand up for people's constitutional rights. And frankly, the office of the sheriff statewide, and even in the Western United States, has been one where there is one elected individual who is supposed to stand up and protect people's constitutional rights. And the legislature dislikes that idea so much that there's even legislation being considered today that is going to allow the legislature to give the authority to a state body to remove elected sheriffs from office. And my belief is they're doing it because they don't like what some of the sheriffs in this state are saying. As long as the sheriffs go along with what the legislature wants, then they're fine. But as soon as a sheriff steps out of line, could be perceived that what I'm saying today would be out of line, there is a non-elected body that would be able to remove me from office. So here we have a legislature dominated by one party and really controlled by people on the other side of this state who don't hold the same values we do here in Eastern Washington, who are trying to keep people who would otherwise lawfully own guns and be able to protect themselves from procuring a firearm. They're going to make it to where you have to pay for a license, pay for a background check, pay for fingerprints, and allow the state patrol to take anywhere from 30 to 90 days to allow you to just purchase a firearm, irrespective of whether you hold firearms or not. They're going to make it to where you have to sign a release allowing the government to have access to all of your personal information so they can make a determination on whether you can or should be able to lawfully purchase a firearm. They're going to make it very, very hard for you to defend yourself against, in a time where violent crime in this community is at an all-time high. They're making legislative moves where they're trying to punish police who protect the citizens in this community from violent crime. They're trying to silence sheriffs whose primary job is to protect the public from violent crime. And it's all in concert, driving to a point where they can silence and control a community from the state. They are absolutely trying to control everything that happens in our local communities and remove local control from everything.
So in this statement, a large portion of the statement addressed that this could, in your opinion, disproportionately impact lower income, law-abiding citizens who are looking to access guns. Can you expand on that more? How do you think that this is particularly impacting that community?
It's pretty straightforward. Firearms are already expensive. In conjunction with other legislation that they are proposing, higher taxes on ammunition. I know they had a bill introduced where they wanted to require surety bonds on every firearm that was owned. I'm not sure whether that legislation got out of committee or not, but there's other legislation that is going to make it expensive. But now we're adding fees. Not only do you have to purchase the firearm, you're going to have to pay an increased tax on the ammunition, you have to pay your tax on the firearm, and now you're going to have to pay to take a class that says you can handle a firearm safely, that's certified by the state. You're going to have to pay for the actual license itself, and now you're going to have to pay for fingerprinting to prove that you don't have anything that would preclude you from possessing a firearm. And mind you, there are already laws and regulations on the books that prevent someone who cannot lawfully possess a firearm from obtaining one. This is simply the state saying it's not enough. We want you to have permission from us to exercise your Second Amendment freedoms. So this is how it disproportionately affects lower economic peoples. Higher fees makes it more unattainable to actually legally possess a firearm. We know that areas that are socioeconomically depressed are associated with higher crime rates for a myriad and litany number of reasons. So these people are exposed to more violence and more crime than everyone else, and now the state is making it even more difficult for them to protect themselves. And again, they are also imposing legislation that is tying the hands of law enforcement from being able to keep their communities safe. I don't know how they can see these policies will do anything other than make our communities less safe, make individuals less secure in their homes. And mind you, this is only about people who want to or believe they should be able to protect themselves with a firearm. It's just making it more expensive and more difficult. In addition to all of the privacy concerns that are tacked on to this legislation at the end, where you've got to give the state very sensitive personal information, and you are, by signing the application, giving the state consent to have very sensitive personal information that they will be able to keep on file.
I spoke to somebody today from Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, and she said, I'm not disputing the validity of the Second Amendment. We're not talking about that. But what, for them, from their perspective, what is the problem with enforcing somebody to take a gun safety course? I think across the board, people believe, that everybody should know how to use a gun. But what is the problem with the state enforcing that gun owners should take a course?
I will give it to you in these terms. Let's take the First Amendment. There are things people who can say that are crimes. You can threaten someone, and if the person believes there's an immediate threat, that's a crime. But there's a lot of things you can say that people won't like, but don't amount to a crime. The state, would anybody argue that the state should not dictate to people having a license to go out and utilize free speech, or mandating somebody go to training from the state of Washington that says this is what you can say and this is what you can't say? Don't we already have laws on the books that already determine what you should and shouldn't do? There are gun safety laws already on the books in the state of Washington. They passed those a couple years ago. I didn't think they were a good idea, but you know what? If that's what's there, that's what's there. But this is a permit issued by the state. It should fly in the face morally and ethically of everything that we believe in this state and in this country.
Is there any part of this bill that you think would be beneficial to law enforcement?
No, there's not. Because all this is, the parts in this bill that deal with people procuring firearms unlawfully are already dealt with in other legislation. And in this legislation as well, this is modifying some legislation that already exists. So everything that law enforcement might need to prevent someone who cannot lawfully possess a firearm is already on the books. This is not going to do anything but make it more difficult for law-abiding citizens to lawfully possess firearms. It doesn't give us any more authority. It doesn't make any new criminal violations for somebody who is out violating the law. It's going to make criminals out of people who can't afford to purchase a firearm.
Touching specifically on the transfer of firearms, this bill says that there has to be a paper trail from person to person to person.
Already exists.
Okay, so this is my follow-up to that. I know that you said that this already exists, but from a law enforcement perspective, could it be beneficial to have a paper trail?
The paper trail already exists. So yeah, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is those requirements already exist in the state of Washington. This is going a step beyond trying to create a paper trail. It goes a step beyond trying to make sure people are handling things safely. Those laws already exist. This is going to create a database of people who are purchasing firearms. It's going to give the state access to personal information that they would otherwise not have access to. And I believe the intent is to put firearm possession out of reach of as many people as they possibly can.
And what is the danger of that?
What's the danger of that? Well, we have a constitutional right to be able to keep and possess firearms. People have the ability and the obligation to be able to protect themselves, particularly in a time and era when we have a legislature that is hell-bent on preventing the police from keeping their communities safe.
I want to go back to your statement. It was obviously very impassioned. You care a lot about what happens with this bill, but you said that this was the Democratic Party version of Jim Crow laws. The only difference now is that instead of limiting one's rights by race, they're limiting rights by socioeconomic class. Why use Jim Crow as an example?
Because those laws were an absolute affront to morality and an absolute affront to the Constitution of the United States. And I think what they're doing now is the same thing the Democratic Party was doing back then. I'm speaking more specifically about, well, if your skin was the wrong color or you happen to be the wrong gender, you didn't get to vote, right? You had to have certain things before you could access your right to vote, your right to free speech and things like that. Well, this is the same ilk. We're going to say that you have to spend money and get our permission to exercise your rights. They're doing the same thing.
Do you think that using the example of Jim Crow, though, could be offensive?
I hope it gets people to pay attention. The intent was to get people upset about it.
Anything else you'd like to add
Nope.
about this bill that we didn't touch on? All right.
Nope.
I think that's everything. Perfect. Thank you very much.